Hey everyone, Cosmic Mango here, your favorite mango from outer space. In today's video, we're doing a deck tech on one of my new favorite decks, and it is Loot Exuberant Explorer. This deck is really fun to play. It's big, green, stompy creatures at its finest, and it's an absolute blast. So, let's check it out.
Okay, so let's actually have a look at our commander. Loot Exuberant Explorer. A legendary creature, beast noble that costs 1 green and 2 generic mana to cast. He has 1 power and 4 toughness and says the following. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. For generic mana, 2 green mana and tap, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from among them and put it onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So yes, Loot is an excellent low casting commander that can help us dig through our decks to find some powerful creature cards. The best part is, we get to play the creatures for free if it has a mana value less than or equal to the number of lands we control. You can also go the landfall route with this commander, as it does allow you to play an additional land on each of your turns. However, with my deck, I have a little bit of landfall in here, but not a lot. I mainly play around that activated ability where I can look at the top 6 cards of my library and play a creature. My game plan is, I try to stack up lands fast with mana ramp spells. Thankfully, Loot has an excellent little static ability that lets me play an additional land on each of my turns. This means I can very rapidly build up a large mana base with lands, and I also use mana dorks to help me start activating Loot's awesome ability. I plan to get as many large creatures out as fast as possible and run everyone over with big old trample damage. It's so simple, yet incredibly fun to play. Every time I pick this deck up, I have an absolute blast. So the main plan is, I try to win with combat damage by flooding the board with as many large creatures as possible. I do this with Loot's excellent activated ability. However, I have a few sneaky cards in the deck that can speed up the process in winning and act as solid win conditions. I also use green tutor spells to help search for many of these sneaky win conditions, or of course, powerful stompy green creatures. So here are the cards that can help us win the game. Craterhoof Behemoth. If I have enough creatures in play, I can win on the spot if Craterhoof manages to enter the battlefield. All creatures gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the number of creatures I control. Pathbreaker Ibex. Similar to Craterhoof, if this goat gets out, my creatures are going to be huge and can swing with combat damage for the win. Finale of Devastation, a sorcery spell that is just so chaotic and fun to play. This lets us pump as much mana as we can into it to search for our largest creature in the library, put it into play and buff up our army of creatures to go full throttle attack mode, and they even gain haste. Overwhelming Stampede. Until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Solid card. And finally, one of the easiest win conditions to pull off with this deck, a card which many people will likely hate, Triumph of the Hordes. Until end of turn, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample and infect. Yeah, crazy card, solid win condition, easy to use, yeah. Yeah, it's infect, what can I say? I actually love infects, but I know a lot of people don't. So anyway, now that we know how the deck is meant to be played, and you've seen how I can win with the deck, let's check out all the cards that are actually inside this deck. Let's start off with the creatures. Okay, starting off with the creatures. We have Ancient Green Warden. It is a creature that costs 2 green and 4 generic mana to cast, has 5 power, 7 toughness, and says, Reach, you may play lands from your graveyard. If a land entering the battlefield causes the triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So the lands playing from graveyard thing, I'm not doing a lot of that in this deck, so I don't care so much about that ability, although it's very good. In fact, I am wondering whether I should start doing that. But the main reason why I'm playing this creature is because even though I only have a few landfall creatures in the deck, their effects are very powerful. So if I can get it to happen additional time, it's really helpful. So Ancient Green Warden is good. It's been good so far. Augur of Autumn. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play lands from the top of your library. And then finally, it has that Coven ability, which says, as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library. A solid card. It's going to help me get lands out, and it's also going to help me cast creatures from the top of my library. Really good for just 3 mana. Avenger of Zendikar. We all know this creature by now, yeah? Solid card. Cost 2 green, 5 generic mana to cast, 5 power, 5 toughness. When Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield, create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a 1/1/1/1 counter on each plant creature you control. Solid cards, going to help us build up an army of plants. We can use them to attack or block with. Really good. Beast Whisperer for 2 green, 2 generic, a 2/3 creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. We're casting loads of creatures in this deck. It's going to help us draw a lot of cards. Solid card for sure. Birds of Paradise. We all know what Birds of Paradise does. 1 mana, 0/1 flying, add 1 mana of any color. Great, it's going to help us ramp up. Blightsteel Colossus. Yeah, there's some funny cards in this deck. Powerful cards for sure. 12 generic mana, Trample Infect. Blightsteel Colossus is indestructible. If Blightsteel Colossus would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, reveal Blightsteel Colossus and shuffle it into its owner's library instead. 11 power, 11 toughness, Trample Infect. Yeah, this is a stompy card. It can help us remove players as well. If it has haste, you can definitely catch people off guard with this one. Courser of Krufix. It's a creature that costs 2 green and 1 generic mana, has 2 power, 4 toughness. Play with the top card of your library revealed, which is nice. You may play the top card of your library if it's land, which is really good, especially if we have loot. It's going to help us get lands out. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Yeah, not amazing, but handy. 1 life here and there, you never know. Might be enough to keep you alive at a certain point in the game. Craterhoof Behemoth. We spoke about this card earlier. It's one of the win conditions in the deck. It does cost a hefty 3 green and 5 generic, 8 in total, but what this card can do, the mana trade-off is fair. Mega powerful card. Win condition, very good. Dryad of the Elysian Grove. For 1 green and 2 generic, a 2/4 creature. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, which combined with loot gets a little bit ridiculous, okay? You can play a lot of lands per turn. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. We don't care so much about that because we're playing mono green, but the fact that we get to play an additional land is very nice. Elder Gargaroth. It's a creature that costs 2 green and 3 generic mana to cast, has 6 power, 6 toughness, and says Vigilance, Reach, Trample. Whenever this creature attacks or blocks, choose 1. Create a 3/3 green beast creature token. You gain 3 life, or draw a card. So yeah, so much card text on this thing. It's a little bit crazy considering how it only costs 5 mana to cast. Vigilance, Reach, Trample is absurd, and then you can also do great stuff whenever it attacks or blocks, so this card always performs very well in the deck. Elvish Mystic, a 1 mana dork, is going to help you tap for mana, very good. Eternal Witness, for 2 green, 1 generic mana. When Eternal Witness enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand, so we can use this to get our favourite cards back to our hand if they are sent to the graveyard. Findhorn Elves, 1 green mana, add 1 green mana, a great mana dork. Ooh, Gauta, Primal Hunger, 2 green and 10 generic, yes, 12 mana in total, but do not fear, because this 12 power, 12 toughness creature can come in for a lot less than 12 mana. It says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures you control. Trample. This is one of my most favourite cards in the deck. I love this thing. I can get this out easily for 2 mana, and there are times where loot can actually help us flip into it when we have enough lands in play. Gauta Stampede Tyrant. It costs 3 green, 5 generic mana, again has 12 power, 12 toughness, and it says Trample. When Gauta Stampede Tyrant enters the battlefield, put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. This is actually a really, really good card. Later game, if we've got loads of cards in our hand and we want to throw them all out at once, this is a great card to get us there. Goreclaw, Terror of Krausisma. It's a creature that costs 1 green and 3 generic mana to cast, has 4 power, 3 toughness, and says creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost less to cast, 2 less generic mana less to cast. Whenever Goreclaw, Terror, or Kalsisma attacks, each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample till end of turn. Really solid card. Most of the creatures in this deck do have 4 or more power, so it's going to help us cast those creatures for less, which is amazing. We can do our stuff quicker and get bigger things out faster, and also we can give trample to those creatures too, which is amazing. Green Sleeves Marrow Sorcerer. It's a creature that costs 2 green and 3 generic mana to cast, has star power, star toughness, protection from planeswalkers and from wizards. We don't care so much about that. It can come in handy, of course. Green Sleeves Marrow Sorcerer's power and toughness are each equal to number of lands you control, which is very good for late game. But this is my favorite bit. Whenever a land enters a battlefield under your control, create a 3/3 green badger creature token. So if we do get Green Sleeves out early, we can create loads of badger tokens quite rapidly, since loot does let us play 2 lands per turn. Kozlok, Butcher of Truth, 10 generic mana to cast, 12 power, 12 toughness. When you cast Kozlok, Butcher of Truth, draw 4 cards. So with Loot's ability, we can't get that ability happening, because we do have to cast Kozlok. So if we use Loot's DM out, since we're playing it, we don't get that ability. So this thing is mainly for casting, which we can do since we're going to have lots of mana in play anyway. Annihilator 4, which is very good. And whenever Kozlok is put into a graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library. It's good. It's a good card. Mossborn Hydra for 1 green and 2 generic mana. Trample. This creature enters with +1/+1 counter on it. Landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, a double number of +1/+1 counters on this creature. So, yeah, this creature, I like this creature a lot. I think it's very cool. It has great potential. I've used it a few times. Every game it seems to do okay. I'm not 100% certain when I'm going to keep the card, but I'm going to playtest it a bit more. But I do honestly believe it has massive potential if I can get enough lands out. This thing can become massive. Oracle of Maul Daya. It's a creature that costs 1 green and 3 generic mana, 2 power, 2 toughness. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play lands from the top of your library. Really good for shifting through our deck, getting cards out. Very good. Pathbreaker Apex, however you want to pronounce it. Spoke about this before. It's a win condition in the deck. Solid card. Love this card. I actually own quite a few copies, and I bought them years ago when they weren't so expensive. I mean, this thing now is like $25, which is crazy. Krilled Great Worm, which costs 2 green and 4 generic mana, has 7 power, 7 toughness, and says Trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1/+1 counters on it, which is obscene, by the way. You may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control, in addition to paying its other costs. So if it does die and you've managed to give your creatures those +1/+1 counters, you can bring it back. This thing's a mega threat. People look at it at first, they think, oh, not too bad. And then you start attacking and they realize just how scary your board presence becomes. Very good. Rampaging Baloths. For 2 green and 4 generic mana, 6 power, 6 toughness, trample, landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. Solid card. For starters, you're paying 6 for a 6/6 trample, which is always pretty good in green. But whenever we play land, we also create those 4/4 green beast creature tokens. This scales very well in the game. Solid card for sure. Seedborn Muse. For 2 green, 3 generic mana, 2 power, 4 toughness. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Okay, I feel like we all know how powerful this card is, yeah? Seedborn Muse is crazy. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step, so we can just continuously use Loot's ability on everyone's turns. If there's 3 opponents, we can do Loot's ability 3 more times by the time it comes back to our turn, so we can quickly flood the board with creatures. Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. Cost 2 green and 1 generic mana to cast, 2 power, 3 toughness. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power. For 1 green and tap, Add X mana any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. I adore this card. One of the first commander I ever built was Selvala. The deck actually played out very similar to how Loot plays out. This card's solid, it's going to draw us cards, it's going to give us massive amounts of mana, both things we need to help us win the game. Soul of the Harvest. For 2 green and 4 generic mana to cast, 6 power, 6 toughness, trample. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Just solid, we get to draw cards, and it's a 6/6 trample. Titania, Nature's Force. Costs 2 green mana to cast and 4 generic mana to cast. Has 6 power, 6 toughness, and says you may play forest from your graveyard. Again, I'm not doing this so often in this deck, but it can happen, so it is decent. Whenever a forest you control enters, create a 5/3 green elemental creature token, which is very nice. And whenever an elemental you control dies, you may mill 3 cards. Not probably going to be doing that very often, but hey, not bad at all. Toski, Bearer of Secrets. Costs 1 green and 3 generic mana to cast, and it says the following. This spell can't be countered. Indestructible, Toski, Bearer of Secrets attacks each combat if able. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Toski is going to help us draw loads of cards over the game, and it has Indestructible, so it's hard to remove. Vault-Born Tyrant. For 2 green and 5 generic mana, it's a 6/6 trample creature. Whenever Vault-Born Tyrant or another creature with 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life and draw a card. When Vault-Born Tyrant dies, if it's not a token, create a token that's a copy of it except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. Yeah, this card's disgusting. Really, really good. And finally, for the creatures, we have Vorinclex, which a lot of people know what this guy does. 2 green, 6 generic mana, a 7/6 trample. Whenever you tap land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, that land doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Whenever I play Vorinclex, it's always removed. It never stays on the board for more than 1 turn, so I kind of just play it to eat up those removals so I can play other cool things later on. But if it does get to stay on the board, yeah, you propel massively ahead of everyone else. Everyone looks at you in disgust while you're just there casting and casting and casting spells, having fun. Vorinclex, yeah, very powerful creature. Okay, that's all the creatures. Now let's move on to the next section in the video. Let's have a look at the enchantments. We have 9 enchantments in this deck. And we're starting off with asceticism. Asceticism? Asceticism? I don't know. Anyway, I feel really stupid right now. Okay. Yes, this enchantment costs 2 green and 3 generic mana to cast. Creatures you control have hexproof. For 1 generic and 1 green, regenerate target creature. The next time it would be destroyed, instead tap it, remove it from combat, and heal L damage on it. Very nice, very handy. I mainly play it for the hexproof. You want to have hexproof on your creatures, yeah? This is a very good way to achieve it. Elemental Bond, which costs 1 green, 2 generic. Whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters battlefield under your control, draw a card. Amazing card. It's going to help us draw loads of cards over the game since we're playing so many creatures, and most of them do have power 3 or more. Garruk's Uprising. For 1 green and 2 generic, when Garruk's Uprising enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. Whenever a creature you control with power 4 or greater enters, draw a card. So this thing only costs 3 mana for starters. It's going to let us draw a card if we have a creature with power 4 or greater in the battlefield. It's going to give all our creatures trample, and we can draw more cards later on if we're casting creatures with power 4 or greater. Don't even have to be casting them, they just have to enter, so very good. Guardian Project costs 1 green and 3 generic. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. Yeah, brilliant card. Going to help us draw a lot of cards over the game. Son of the Dryads costs 1 green and 2 generic. Is enchantment which says enchant permanent. Enchanted permanent is a colorless forest land. So this is a great way of getting rid of people's most powerful permanents on the board. You can use it on people's commanders, which will probably really annoy them. But if they're really ahead and you need a way of shutting them down, you can use this to help you do that. And it's also permanent, by the way, so imagine how many things you can shut down with this card. Tribute to the World Tree, which is an enchantment that costs 3 green mana to cast, and it says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. Otherwise, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Very good. Going to help us draw cards and even give counters. Unnatural Growth. I adore this card. Okay, this thing is amazing. 4 green and 1 generic mana. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. So this works on each combat, by the way. So if people are attacking us, our creatures are becoming huge. If we're attacking people, opponents, our creatures are becoming huge. Whatever we do, our creatures are just going to be massive. You can win games with this. You can save yourself with this. People will try to move it as fast as possible. So best to use it as fast as you can. It doesn't stay for long. It's very, very, very good. Up the Beanstalk. Costs 1 green and 1 generic mana to cast. When Up the Beanstalk enters the battlefield and whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card. Good card, very good. Help us draw lots of cards over the game. And only costs 2 mana to cast. And finally, Wilderness Reclamation. For 1 green and 3 generic mana, at the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. So similar to Seaborn Muse, but not as good, but still relevant, still handy. It's going to help us use Loot Exuberant Explorer ability an extra turn until our turn comes back. So very, very good. Okay, that's the enchantments done and dusted. Now let's have a look at the artifacts. For the artifacts, I have 4 artifacts in this deck, and they are Emerald Medallion. It's 2 generic mana to cast, and it says green spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I'm still playtesting this one, but it's good, okay? All my spells are costing 1 less to cast, so with it being a mono green deck, yeah, it's solid. I can't really complain. It's good. I like it. Illusionist Braces for 2 generic mana. Whenever an ability of a equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. Equip 3 generic mana. Yeah, solid. I mean, it's going to help us use Loot's ability twice. Really good. Soul Ring, we all know what this card does. For 1 generic mana. Tap, add 2 generic mana. It's going to help us do lots of crazy stuff. Mana, lots of mana, yay. And finally, the Great Henge, which costs 2 green and 7 generic mana. It says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, so that's already super good. We can get this out for a lot less than 9 mana. For tap, add 2 green, you gain 2 life. Again, very good. And finally, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it and draw a card. So another way for us to draw cards. Solid addition to the deck. But ridiculously expensive. I mean, this thing is like $85 right now, which is nuts. Super nuts. But I guess, you know, great power comes great prices. Okay, that's the artifacts done. Now moving on to the instant and sorcery spells. Okay, starting with the sorceries, we have Cultivate for 1 green and 2 generic mana. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. We need lands. Cultivate helps us get lands. Good card. Finale of Devastation. We spoke about this card before. It costs 2 green and X. It's going to help us win the game. Super good card. Green Sun's Zenith. For 1 green and X, search your library for a green creature card with mana value X or less. Put it onto the battlefield. Then shuffle. Shuffle Green Sun's Zenith into your owner's library. Very good card. Going to help us search for our favourite creatures or our win conditions or whatever we really need for that present time. Kodama's Reach for 1 green and 2 generic mana. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards and put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand. Then shuffle your library. Again, we need lands with loot. This helps us get lands. Great card. Last March of the Ents, which is such a cool looking card, by the way. Look at that art, amazing. For 2 green and 6 generic mana, this spell can't be countered. Very nice. Draw cards equal to the greatest toughness among creatures you control, then put any number of creature cards from your hand onto the battlefield. So this can act as a win condition. It's very good. It's going to help us draw a lot of cards and play a lot of creatures. Natural Order. For 2 generic and 2 green, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a green creature, search your library for a green creature card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This is a very good card for finding win conditions. Nature's Law for 1 green, 1 generic, search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Again, we need lands for loot, this gets us land, very, very good. Overwhelming Stampede, we spoke about this before, it's a win condition in the deck, costs 2 green, 3 generic, solid card, very, very good. Rampant Growth, for 1 green, 1 generic, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle, gives us lands, very good. And finally for the sorceries, we have Triumph of the Hordes. This is one of the win conditions in the deck, costs 2 green, 2 generic mana to cast, and is going to give our creatures infect, which is absolutely absurd, very powerful. Now, for the instant spells, we have Arc Druid's Charm, which costs 3 green mana to cast, and it says the following. Choose 1, search your library for a creature or land card, and reveal it. Put it onto the battlefield, tapped if it's a land card, otherwise put it into your hand, then shuffle. Or, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. And finally, exile target artifact or enchantment. So this is an incredibly versatile instant spell. For just 3 mana, you get 3 amazing options, okay? You can't go wrong running this in any mono green deck. Very good card. Beast Within. For 1 green, 2 generic mana, destroy target opponent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. One of the best removals in the game in my opinion, and probably the best removal in green. Very, very good. Entish Restoration. Costs 1 green, 2 generic mana to cast, and says sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, instead search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. This is a brilliant card for getting us lands. Heroic Intervention. For 1 green, 1 generic mana, permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible till the end of turn. Wonderful way for protecting our permanents. Legolas Quick Reflexes. Split second. As long as this spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. Untap target creature. Until end of turn, it gains hexproof. Reach, and whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals damage equal to its powered up to 1 target creature. I love this card. Instant speed, 1 mana, protect our favorite creature on the board. I'm usually using this to protect loot early game or a really powerful creature late game. Nature's Claim. For 1 green mana, destroy target artifact or enchantment its controller gains 4 life. We don't care so much about that 4 life. We care about how we can destroy an artifact or enchantment for just green mana. It's amazing. Let them gain that 4 life, but we're going to remove something incredibly powerful in return. Return to Nature. For 1 green and 1 generic, choose 1, destroy target artifact, or destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. 3 solid options, only 2 mana, instant speed, very good. Tamio's Safekeeping. For 1 green mana, target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn, you gain 2 life. Very, very good way for protecting loot early game, and we can even use it late game to protect whatever absurdly powerful creature we have on the board. And finally, Worldly Tutor. For 1 green mana, search your library for a creature card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. Amazing. 1 green mana, search for one of your best creatures in the deck, search for a win condition, whatever you need. It has to be a creature though, of course, but very good. Solid card. Okay, that's most of the cards done in the deck. Finally, we're on to the last bit, the lands. Okay, last but not least, we have the lands. There are 37 lands in this deck, 4 of which are non-basic, and 33 are forests. So yeah, 33 forests, and then we have Boseiju, Who Endures, which is a great land, has for 1 and tap, add 1 green mana. But you have that channel ability, which says for 1 generic and 1 green, discard Boseiju, Who Endures, destroy target artifacts, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search the library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle that. Then shuffle. This ability only costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control, which is good. Very, very good card. Castle Garenbrick, which is a land which taps for 1 green mana, but you can also tap this thing for 2 generic and 2 forests 2 green basically, and then you tap it and you add 6 green mana. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. So you can use this to utilize Loot Exuberant Explorer's ability for 2 less mana, because it's going to cost us 4 instead of 6 of this thing here. Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, which is a land that taps for 1 generic mana, or you can tap 2 and tap this land to choose a color, add to your mana pool an amount of mana of that color equal to devotion to that color, which is crazy considering we're playing a monocolored deck, so you can tap this thing to add a lot of mana to your mana pool. And finally, War Room. Tap, add 1 generic mana, or for 3 generic mana tap, pay life equal to number of colors in your commander's color identity, draw a card. So you're paying 1 life and you're drawing 1 card. It's decent. I'm still playtesting this one. I like it. I think it's good. Yeah, War Room, cool card. So yeah, that is the deck. They're all the cards in the deck. What do you all think? Do you have any recommendations on some cards that I should probably take out, or cards that I should try and add in? I love reading your comments, so let me know what you think. Have any of you played Loot Exuberant Explorer? Do any of you currently own a Loot deck? If so, let me know in the comments below. I love this commander so much. I'm planning on keeping it for a long time, and I do want to get it to be better, so upgrading it would be fun. So yes, please let me know if you have any recommendations. Thanks for watching the video, everyone, and as always, take care and goodbye.